So, I think a major problem with modern conventions is the over reliance on industry guests, that is, voice actors and animators and things like that. I think you would get a lot more bang for your buck at a convention if you would just invite what they call fan guests, famous YouTubers, people that are popular within the culture that you're marketing to, that sort of thing. Not only are they cheaper, but I feel like they draw a larger crowd ultimately. And especially going to conventions in Texas, you end up seeing a lot of the same voice actors again and again and again because Funimation is in Texas. But that aside, I once got to meet Ego Raptor, and I'm not like, super turbo nerd about Ego Raptor and some or anything like that, but I grew up watching, the awesome series, and this was before Game Grumps when I saw him at San Japan. But I was a big fan of that. I really liked Sequelitis as well, and I waited in line at the end of the day to get to meet him, have him sign something, and ask him a question. And you remember before I said that I always had a knife in my boot. Well, I also usually carried MRE matches around with me for whatever reason. And for, again, whatever reason, I decided that's what I wanted to have him sign. So I had Ego Raptor sign this book of matches that I had. And I asked him what he thought constituted art and whether or not art necessitated a viewer. And that's a thing I ask almost every famous person I get to interact with, if art necessitates a viewer. And I feel like that's usually more illuminating about their thought process towards the thing that they do than anything else I could ask them. So that's usually what I ask. But yeah, a little later on, I was outside and I was smoking, and there were these guys out there talking about how cool it was to meet Ego Raptor, and they're buddies with him, and he's like, "Oh man, I can't believe that I missed out on getting such and such signed by him. I'm such a big fan." And I remember taking out my book of matches. I was like, "Yeah, I had him sign this book of matches," and I had a cigarette in my hand, and I held it to the book of matches, and I burned the whole thing up, and I just threw it on the ground. And like the guys were like, "Why, dude? Why'd you do that? There's a signature from Ego Raptor." I was like, "Because the story of getting that signature is more important than the signature itself." And that is so much of my opinion on like idol worship and being part of a fandom and being part of almost everything, is that the possessions that you gain in the process of being a part of that are so unimportant compared to the story and the impact those things had on you. As a media example, let me recommend, there's this show called Garish Number, and it's all about a group of unscrupulous people basically trying to make an anime for as cheap as possible that will garner the biggest sales possible so they can, make money without working too hard. But even this unscrupulous group ends up having like people who really liked the work, people who liked the original light novel it was based on, people that end up liking the anime and want to be involved in it. It ends up having voice actors that get involved because, it's their break into the industry, that sort of thing. And there are all these stories surrounding this unscrupulous piece of media that ultimately are more interesting than the piece of media around it. Or like The Room. If you just took The Room as a self-contained movie, it's pretty bad and maybe kind of funny, and maybe that's worth it to you. But all these insane things around it are just so much more fascinating to me, like the things about the production. So when I get to look at a troubled production of some sort, or I get to look at a movie of any kind, a lot of times I find that the stories about that are more important than the story of, that thing. As another example, not even just with like media, but with, say, video games in my case. I remember going to the midnight release for Portal 2 when it came out, and at the same time, as Portal 2 was released, the same day there was a Mortal Kombat fighting game that was released. I'm not sure which one, but I remember showing up to the store and there's just all these people lined up, and I'm like, man, there are a lot of people really excited about Portal. I wouldn't think that it would be like that because, a lot of people probably just going to download the game, but I wanted a physical copy. And man, I remember lining up, and they come outside and they're finally like, okay, if you want Portal, go over here, and if you want Mortal Kombat, go over here. And like, me and the person that I brought with me, my buddy, got into the Portal 2 line, and everyone else got in line for Mortal Kombat. And that story is more important to me than Mortal Kombat would ever be. I don't know about Portal 2. Portal 2 is pretty wonderful, but that's another experience. The experience of Portal 2 is probably more important to me than that story. But any physical copy, any physical thing I got from that is less important to me than that story. Being able to relate that to people, having that memory, and building all this anticipation for a thing that ultimately just, was a lot more exciting to me than anybody else that happened to be there that night. And I think that's an important thing to take away as we get into a progressively, more and more expensive convention circuit. Like every single year I see at A-Kon, it feels like it gets $5 or $10 more expensive, right? And we're just moving on up. And then every convention seems to ramp up their prices along with it. And then there's lots of little tiny conventions that see the money there, and they're starting to jump in with lower prices so they can draw in the people that didn't want to spend all that money at A-Kon and A-Fest and all those places. So as we get this more expensive con circuit, and as we basically pay money to go to a dealer's room to shop for things, because most people that buy, con passes don't go to panels. So they're basically spending money to go to a nerd flea market. You know what I mean? And that's kind of depressing to me, especially in an age where we have stuff like Amazon, or if you're in it for the art, you could just go on DA, and I bet a lot of your favorite artists would be happy to do a commission for you over the internet, maybe even with higher quality than you could get over a weekend at a convention. So yeah, I think a lot of times the more important thing is to remember that it's not the material things that are the important part, it's the story. That's my theory on alcohol too. If you ever go to a liquor store and you're like, man, all this booze is so expensive, you're not paying for the alcohol. You're paying for the story that this alcohol is going to create. Unless you're an alcoholic. If you're paying for the alcohol, that's my qualification for you being an alcoholic. If you're buying alcohol just because you want alcohol because you need alcohol to feel normal, that's being an alcoholic. If you're paying for a story you're going to have with friends, or an adventure you're going to go on with some people, that's what you're actually paying for at a liquor store. And I'm fine with that. If you want to pay for a good time, you can pay for a good time. We'll get into the politics of that some other time, I think. I don't know if I'm ready to get into politics on this channel. I mostly just want to talk about, personal stories from my life and how they relate to media I consume. So yeah, go out there, don't care about the physical things attached to it, and just get a lot of stories. Don't be afraid to spend money on a thing. I'm not saying that, but value the story of getting that thing more than the thing itself. Just as one more quick story, actually. So, I'm kind of enjoying My Hero Academia a whole lot right now. And over in Comic-Con San Diego, they had like some My Hero Academia, they had like a pin and a poster and some unique vigilante stuff that I was real interested in. But you see, the thing about that was, I didn't go to San Diego Comic-Con, but I do have a vendor buddy who travels convention to convention just selling stuff. That's what he does for a living. And I paid him $50 to grab me a bunch of that stuff. And just the stories he told me of like trying to get in line early enough to get these posters, and saying that if I wanted to get a signature, he was going to have to find this person in the hallways and just ask him in person, and then trying to find pictures of the author of My Hero Academia, which was a little harder than I expected. Trying to find pictures of him, and just hearing all these adventures he was going on at Comic-Con is more valuable to me than the manga and the poster that are sitting on my mantle right now collecting dust, honestly. Or the pin that's still in the bag that I don't know what to do with. But all the adventure that generated is so much more valuable to me. And I think that's what I want to take away from everything that I spend money on. Is I want the story, the adventure, the experience of what that thing was. And try that for yourself, guys. See if that works for you.